Rangers fans, welcome to episode 9 of Rangers Recon, the premier place to become a smarter Rangers fan, a part of Ice House Media. Alongside Arthur Staple, I'm Andrew Chelney. Dylan Larkin wants out of Detroit. Would he be a target for the Rangers? According to Lane St. James's report, though, maybe not. Plus, Anders Lee is probably walking in for agency. What does all of that mean for Vinny Trocheck's trade value? Stape, we're starting to have some buzz again. This is fun.
We are. It does grow, and I guess this year it grows a little bit more because there's so little out there. We have to throw Alex Tuch in the mix. You know, the latest report is that he's probably headed to July 1. May doesn't mean he's not going to still end up in Buffalo, but that's a guy that you gotta circle if you're the Rangers. And I think I was the one to throw out there that Dylan Larkin, you know, even if the Rangers aren't on his list, I can't imagine that would prevent Chris Drury from giving Steve Yzerman a call and saying, what would it take? Because Dylan Larkin, to me, even if you say he's not the right guy for the Rangers right now, he is the right name, the right status level, the right position for this Rangers organization, ownership, GM to be interested, because we know, we've talked about it, there's no appetite for another longish retool, rebuild, whatever you want to call it. They clearly want to spin this thing around as quickly as they can. And when guys like Larkin become available and can choose their destination, I think the Rangers have interest. I think the thing that's probably the most noteworthy to me is that the Rangers are in a position right now where they are in the standings, where they've been in the standings, where they are, you know, in the NHL landscape in terms of how they're perceived, is that a guy like Dylan Larkin isn't interested in the Rangers right now. That's the noteworthy thing to me, is that if you ever had an American guy who was an established player who wanted to go somewhere to a bigger stage to get further in the playoffs, the Rangers were on that list a lot in the last 10 to 15, 20 years. And now they're not. And it does highlight how hard this turnaround is going to be.
Yeah, and so according to Helene St. Jesus' report, Dylan Larkin wants to go to 3 teams. It's Vegas, it's Minnesota, and it's Florida. Now, if I'm Steve Yzerman, I look at this list and I go, can I have a different one? Like, this is not like, what are we talking about here? And it would be a little bit easier for Yzerman to do Minnesota, but Minnesota's a rival. They're so close together, and Vegas doesn't really have the cap space. They have to figure out Barbashev's contract. I don't really know, like, do they trade Hurdle to somewhere and then try to, like, it would have to be a lot of gymnastics for Vegas to have to do that. I'm not saying that they don't want to, but it would be a lot of work for that managerial staff to figure it out. And if I'm Steve Yzerman, I go, that's like, you have been here your whole career. The playoffs haven't gone as you know, as well as we would have liked. 3 teams, and, you know, Florida, yeah, they had a tough year this season with all the injuries, but back-to-back Cup champs. You got Vegas that's in the Cup final right now, and you have Minnesota that is knocking on the door. At least I thought they were until they met Colorado. For Detroit, it just seems like this is not a long enough list of destinations for me to choose from. And, you know, when you think about reports like this, and I'm not questioning Elaine St. James at all. I think she's great at what she does, and I'm not throwing any shade at her way at all. My point is, when these reports come out, you always have to think about, where did she hear this from, and why is this coming out now? Did the agent tell her this? What was the point of this information getting to her? Like, why is this pressure on these 3 teams being related to right now? That's my question, more so than, oh, he only wants to go to these 3 teams, because that doesn't make too much sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to try to read between the lines here. You know, Pat Brisson is Dylan Larkin's agent, so you know that the list is not necessarily the list for if that's where it's coming from. And then on the other side, you have Steve Yzerman, who, you know, Helene St. James has covered the Red Wings for many, many years, and she is exceptional at what she does. But Steve Yzerman operates the way that Steve Yzerman wants to, which is he talks to nobody. He leaks nothing. He punishes leakers within his organization. He is as tight-lipped a GM as they come. So you can say to yourself, like, this might be a strategic move. I kind of feel like talking to people in the last couple, when you saw the request come out, just talking to people in the league, you'd say, without even knowing what the list is, the top three would be Tampa, Florida, Vegas. Vegas because players want to go there. They win a Stanley Cup now, and he can see, Dylan Larkin might equate his own situation to what Mitch Marner did, was in Toronto, local guy, rose up to be a leader of the team, certainly performed well enough, but never was able to even, and I don't even think Dylan Larkin as a Red Wing accomplished maybe even 70% of what Mitch Marner accomplished at the Leafs, which was not very much. So, if he's feeling that frustration about the team not getting over the hump, well, here's a team in Vegas that is ruthless year after year. They're not patient like Detroit has been. Let me go there. And you're talking about like, yeah, they don't have room. They need to do this. Look, you can say all you want about George McPhee and Kelly McCrimmon's operation. They will, if they want Dylan Larkin, they'll get Dylan Larkin. They'll give up the assets they need to get up. They'll clear the cap space that they need to clear. It'll piss some people off. That's just the way they operate, even as they're halfway to a Stanley Cup here this week. So, and the Florida teams, Florida, I think, is a destination. He played with Matthew Tuch at the Olympics. I think that's another place that's become a destination for guys because, like Vegas, no tax state, very competitive team that wants to win every year, despite what they did this past season. And Tampa to me is very similar than to Florida rather. So without knowing who you'd put on a list, without asking Pat Brisson, hey, what's the list? Those would be the top three teams I would have guessed. So we've got two of those three on Helene's list. And she added in a couple others that if you wanted to expand, Tampa was on that list. She put the Islanders on there. Very nice of her to say that. There's no chance that's happening. So I think knowing the players behind the scenes, behind Dylan Larkin, who Pat Brisson is, what he's accomplished as an agent in this league, Steve Yzerman, what he's accomplished as a GM, I don't think this list is definitive and final. I think this is a process. It may be a quick one if he wants this to be done before next season. It could go fast, but I think it's more chess match than just saying these are my only three teams. Work it out, Steve Yzerman, because Steve Yzerman is going to say, no, we're not doing that. I'm not being pushed into a corner like that. So I think this process has kind of just begun, and maybe it'll expand, maybe it'll change, maybe it'll be, I've got this deal lined up for you with the Rangers. Like this is a deal that we're willing to do. Are you willing to consider them? So, I don't know that the Rangers are going to work their way into that conversation, but I don't know that saying it's these three teams means these are the only places he could go when we're talking about destinations for him.
And the question too, if you're Yzerman, is okay, well, if I'm going to trade Dylan Larkin, what is the return going to look like? They were on the doorstep of the playoffs and they didn't make it. And so this team is kind of built for right now. They have a lot of young players, but also they're not built for like if they're very 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Well, they have these older players on the team, but also these very young players that are up and coming. And Dylan Larkin is kind of in the middle of that. So if you trade Dylan Larkin, you almost have to pick a side, and the return that you get for Larkin should tell everybody what the direction of your team is. Because if you trade Dylan Larkin for an established player plus, maybe a pick or whatever it is, then you're telling everybody, okay, we traded our captain, our guy for this player, and now we are firmly going for the playoffs. This is what we're doing. Maybe that involves moving another young player for another established player. Like if that's the move that you want to make, or if Yzerman trades Larkin to wherever and he gets, I saw a tweet about it today. Like, what if Florida called and offered Anton Lundell a number 9? Like, does that work? Okay, well, if you trade for number 9, then are you trading that pick again and getting another established player? Or are you taking somebody at number 9 and you're going that route? this trade really does dictate, I think, the fork in the road for the Red Wings. Where do they go, and what Yzerman gets for Larkin, wherever he ends up, I think will tell you exactly where they're going.
Yeah, and I think one kind of exception to what I was talking about earlier is if this does get resolved quickly, I think it speaks to the kind of Steve Yzerman status with Detroit ownership, that there's certainly some discontent there. What is it, year 8, I think, for him there. And they obviously haven't succeeded in any way, shape, or form with his plan. And you look at that roster and you say, yeah, there's a lot of young talent here, but what is the plan? Why am I still seeing the Patrick Kanes and the Andrew Kopps and, you know, guys that have been good soldiers and have had good contributions over their careers, but are not necessarily guys that you want to be frontline guys right now? What's happening with their dozen or so goalie prospects? Why hasn't anybody blossomed to kind of seize the moment at the NHL level to give them more stability? So if this is resolved quickly and not a long knockdown drag out, I don't believe that to be the case. Then it kind of says to me, oh, Steve Yzerman might be in trouble, and he needs, he's hitting that point of desperation, I guess you could say, which is not something you'd ever associate with how he's managed either in Tampa or here. And when I think that word desperation is one that gets thrown around a lot now about the Rangers and Chris Drury, about what they're trying to do this offseason and what we're going to talk about today, and kind of these potential, I don't know if they're franchise changing signings or deals, but they need to be. I think the Rangers need something like that. They need a couple somethings like that. You're looking at a situation where we talked about it the last few weeks. Keandre Miller is in the Conn Smythe conversation, and that is a guy that could still be a Ranger. He could still be a top pair guy for the Rangers, and could still be providing them what they possibly need, which is better depth on the left side of their defense. You've got guys like Brett Howden, and again, we're a long way removed from Brett Howden, and he is a very different player right now in Vegas. But another guy who could win a Conn Smythe, who was in the Rangers organization, was a guy that they were supposed to develop and didn't. So the pressure mounts, and when you get desperate as a GM, I think you act a little quicker, and you maybe act a little bolder, and we'll see if that's going to have an impact on the Red Wings, because they maybe are getting to that Fisher cut bait point with Steve Yzerman. And I don't know that Jim Dolan is there. He's got a good distraction right now with his other team at the Garden, but when his attention turns to the Rangers, I do wonder what the pressure situation is like there, and the level of desperation that the Rangers are going to operate with this summer.
I wonder what Yzerman's ideal trade package would be for Dylan Larkin. I would think, first of all, he wants to trade him west. It would be surprising to me unless he gets, an incredible can't miss deal from an Eastern team. I would think that his desire would be to send him to the other conference. I'm curious as to what the ideal trade looks for him. And again, because he's 1 foot in, 1 foot out with this roster, is the ideal trade for him, like, I'm just going to make this up, like, is it Trocheck and Braden Schneider and, the late first round pick? I think it's Dallas's in 26. Like, is that the ideal? Does he want Lundell and number 9 from Florida? Is that the ideal? I think it's interesting to think about, is the trade that Yzerman going to make, is it the one that he actually wants to do for the direction of this team? Because like you said, he has a lot of pressure to succeed this year. Like, this has to be the make or break for Steve Yzerman. I kind of thought it was going to be last year. He's still here, and Dylan Larkin went out, so I would have to think that he's going to be in charge of making this deal. And I guess maybe Detroit might reconvene in December or at the trade deadline. I don't know, but the draft is like 6 minutes away, and he's still the GM. So I would have to think that he's going to be there for at least through that. So he's going to be operating this on the assumption that, okay, the clock is ticking, I have to go. Is that the trade that he's going to want to make? And I think that's an interesting, at least, dissection of, we have a GM that is probably going to make one trade, but is that the one that he's envisioning the direction of this team go? Maybe it's the same thing, but maybe it's not. And under pressure, I'm interested to see what Yzerman does.
Yeah, I mean, to swing it back around to the Rangers, I kind of even feel like, if the Rangers were on Larkin's list, I feel like Trocheck, Schneider in a first is too much to give up for Dylan Larkin, to be quite honest. I know that Vincent Trocheck is not going to be the centerpiece of a deal for a guy who's only, younger, better, more skilled, cost controlled for a similar amount of time. You're not going to be able to do that. But I feel like, we're looking at a changing landscape in the NHL, where guys in Larkin's situation, in Matthew Tuch's situation, whatever, going back, Quinn Hughes, are gonna want to be signed and have a say in where they go. They're not going to leave it to chance. They're not going to walk themselves to July 1 necessarily. We're probably going to see it with Austin Matthews at some point in the next year or so. We might even see it with Connor McDavid, and then the real insanity will begin. But I feel like we are in a newly shifted environment where guys with no move or no trade clauses, guys with term, are going to say, this is the time I want to make a change, and I say where I go. And I think that changes kind of the puckpedia-ness of it, of just sort of putting your fantasy trade proposal together. You don't need to sell off every asset that you have. You don't even need to sell off half of the assets you have. You just need to kind of be strategic and sit back and fold your arms and say, are they going to take it or are they not? Does the guy want to come to my team or doesn't he? So, I think unfortunately for the Rangers, because Panarin was on an expiring deal and he wanted an extension with part of whatever his next move was going to be, he, I think, genuinely was pissed about the low ball offer from the summer. And I think he wanted to maximize the pain for Chris Drury and the Rangers. I don't know that Artemi Panarin is going to do one thing to make the Kings a competitive Stanley Cup contender in the next 2 years. And I don't know that he cares necessarily. I think he was really hurt by the offer that the Rangers made to him last summer. And I think he wanted to just draw it out. And so did his agent. And that's, it figures that was the guy the Rangers had in this, this chessboard of big name guys that wanted to change scenery and still have some term or sign a new deal and pick their destination. So, maybe they'll have better luck next time. Obviously, Vincent Trocheck only has a limited no trade clause, so that's a bit different. But we'll see. We'll see whether the Rangers can be the beneficiary of that. Probably not in this scenario, but maybe another one down the road.
It's interesting to me that you said Trocheck and Schneider in a first is too much. Again, like, I'm not advocating for it. I just kind of made it up, and
those are the guys that you're willing to get rid of.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, like Trocheck is somebody that should have been traded in February, and he's still here. He was taking pictures with the Wild players, like he was ready to go, and he wasn't moved. So that's, Trocheck is on the top of the list, obviously, and Schneider is a guy that teams are really coveting for some reason. To me is a bottom pair defenseman who just hasn't really gotten better, even though he's gotten multiple chances at it. So to me, is expendable. I know some teams are really high on him, but good luck and best wishes, I guess, to you in that situation. And the first round pick is probably a lot to add to that, but okay, fine. Like, you also just do a second round pick, a third round pick, whatever it is. I still, I originally said first round pick because I think that you kind of have to overpay if you're the Rangers in the situation to get Steve Yzerman to trade Dylan Larkin to you, especially if he doesn't want to go to the Rangers initially. Maybe, if Yzerman goes to him and says, hey, we have this amazing offer from the Rangers, would you want to go here? And he says yes, and that deal is consummated. Would Chris Drury have to, quote unquote, overpay to get somebody like Larkin to really, upgrade that top six, especially down the middle? Not, first round pick plus those guys is tough, but if you're Chris Drury and you mentioned pressure, and he's under a lot of it right now, feeling this pressure from management, from the fans, from everybody else. Is that enough for him to take another big swing like this? Is Chris Drury going to, weaponize the draft picks that he has? He's not going to give up number 5, at least not to my knowledge. Maybe there's something, shadowy in the works for something huge that I'm not aware of, but that's, I guess we'll see when the draft is here. But maybe he does use that late round pick to try to quote unquote fix the roster somehow. I don't know, but he's under a lot of pressure to do it. So I wonder if that's what he's looking at.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you, and we've talked about it. I'd be, and certainly I think we've heard maybe from some reports recently that the Rangers aren't quite so hot to trade Vincent Trocheck. Maybe that's strategy. Maybe we'll see, kind of a better offer. Maybe, and to my mind, that is a different conversation. I don't know that the Dylan Larkin trade talk really impacts what anybody wants to do with Vincent Trocheck and what offers they can make, because obviously, like we said, his trade list is no trade list is a lot smaller. And different style player. I think you're not dropping him in right at the, as a number 1 center or number 2 center. Necessarily Trocheck probably is a number 2 center, but on a good team, I think I'm with you. I think he's more of a number 3. But anyway, if it's true that they're cooling on that, I would hope that that cooling on that means they're a little bit higher on trading Braden Schneider. And I feel like that, to me, is a guy that you can get a lot back for it, because I do think that he was drafted recently enough and was highly regarded recently enough that there are teams that still want him, even though a lot of front offices and scouting staffs have changed since then. And I think that player plus that, the Carolina pick, is that going to be 30 or 31 or something like that? I think that gets you back something good, someone young and cost controlled, maybe a good higher end forward, maybe a more solid middle pair defenseman on either side, because if you're trading Braden Schneider, you need them on both sides. If to me, ideally, your top pair is Vlad Gavrikov and Adam Fox, and in a perfect world, your third pair is Matthew Robertson and Will Borgen, then you don't want to start the season with no second pair. I get that. But if you trade Braden Schneider for someone to plug in there, and you can sign one of the very few free agents that are out there to fill in on the left side, then suddenly you got something there. And I think, to my mind, not because they were bad defensively, but just because overall that D-corps needs to be bolstered. I think that, to me, is the focus. I think with the forward group they have, if you keep Vincent Trocheck, I think you can make the playoffs and win around in the East with that group of forwards that they have. A couple of tweaks for sure, but the power play will still be good enough. Vincent Trocheck is still a 50 to 60 point guy. He still does a lot of different things for you. I think the focus should definitely be on trading Braden Schneider. And if you're going to package in the late first round pick from Carolina, you can get some stuff done with that. And I'm curious to see if that changes, if this, whatever rumors that come out that maybe they're looking to do that. That to me is based on what's available. It also, to my mind, and we can transition into talk about that, because we do have some more rumor tidbits that Alex Tuch and the Sabres are far apart. I think it takes giving Alex Tuch 7 years and $10 million per off the table, which is probably going to be a win for the teams that do not commit to that. And I like this player a lot. I think he's a guy that, if you're a team that's one top 6 solidly built guy away who plays in all situations, that's your guy. Maybe he goes to Florida if they can figure out how to make that money work, and he puts them over the top if they don't get Dylan Larkin. Maybe he goes to Tampa and kind of bolsters that group if they can make the money work. I don't think that the Rangers are one Alex Tuch away, especially if, to make that work, you do subtract Vincent Trocheck. So I think keeping Trocheck at this point, to me, based on what's out there, seems like the shrewder path. What do you think?
I think, I definitely don't agree with Alex Tuch for like $10 million per season. I think it'd be very, very silly, I'll just say it like that, to trade Panarin, who was making what was it, 11 and a half away, who was undoubtedly a much better player, to sign Alex Tuch to a slightly cheaper contract. Alex Tuch is a good player. Don't get me wrong. I would love to have him on my team if he wasn't asking, or, the thought process is that he would want $10 million a year. If he was making, 7, I'm on board. If he was making 7.5, I'd still be on board. 10 is, I'm not paying $10 million for Alex Tuch. I'm sorry. So for the Rangers, it would be a PR, I think, disaster for you to go through everything with Panarin and his contract and that extension and what you reportedly offered him and how he was not happy about it, right? And all that went down, just to turn around and give Alex Tuch a pretty similarly built contract. That would not, I don't think that that's something that Chris Drury would do, and I think that would cause riots in the streets if that were the case. So I think Chris Drury is smarter than that. At least that's my assumption. So I don't see him in a Rangers jersey. Alex Tuch is somebody that I just didn't really like in these playoffs, and that's a red flag to me, because you could do a whole lot in the regular season, you could look really good. Kind of matters when you get to April. And I think Draymond Green put it best. Like, there's 82 game players and there's 16 game players.
Yeah.
Alex Tuch, are you an 82 game player or 16 game player? And that's if I have to ask you that, as opposed to already knowing the answer, that's a problem in and of itself. And for the Rangers, okay, well, even if you do sign Alex Tuch and you win all round and then you get bounced, is that enough? Is that good enough for the Rangers management and Jim Dolan and everybody else that makes those decisions to keep Drury around? Is that the bar? Where is the bar? I thought it was already low, and they didn't make but prior to the season when they didn't make the playoffs, and then they didn't make it again, it was even worse. So I don't know what the expectations are right now for this team, and if they make the playoffs, is that enough? If they win one round, is that enough? I don't know how to answer that. And that's tough in and of itself.
Yeah. Just doing a quick Puckpedia search while we were talking there. I would much rather overcommit on money and term to a Mario Ferraro or a Ryan Shea, a guy that Mike Sullivan's probably pretty familiar with, who's going to get a huge boost from his whatever 900 that he was making after a great season in Pittsburgh. And I would assume the Penguins want to keep him. But if you're going to give someone a little bit of term and increase their salary by an astronomical amount, I would much rather it be a guy that fits a role as a second pair left side guy, which is, to me, a need that the Rangers have. And again, this is, these are building block moves. You get a guy who's still in his 20s. Maybe you give him too much term. Maybe you give him a little too much money, but you definitely have it. But you've got a guy that can play 20 minutes a night. You've got a guy that's had some experience in being a guy who's been super reliable. Shea has had that. Mario Ferraro played on terrible defenses for a long, long time. I'd be curious to see how he plays as a guy who doesn't necessarily need to be relied on to play 24, 25 minutes a night, which he's clearly not built for. So that's, to me, that's where you're going to overcommit in free agency. If you go for an Alex Tuch, if you go for somebody that's not gonna fill the biggest need for this team. They have a lot of needs. They were not a good team this year. They were a bad team.
Quite literally the worst team in the Eastern Conference.
They were not a good team in 24-25, and they were worse by every metric this past year. So I think you need more foundational picks. You're not one forward away from being a Stanley Cup contender. You need to start looking at the board and seeing the holes and saying, if we put this guy in here, if we sign Ryan Shea for 6 years and $5.5 million in a vacuum, that is an overpay for a guy who's had one good year at the NHL level and is already 29. I totally get that. But that is much more palatable to me going forward and fills a bigger need to me going forward for this where the Rangers are right now than giving Alex Tuch $10 million or chasing after Jordan Kyrou with Braden Schneider and a first round pick, things like that. I'm curious to see how they proceed. And, we always hear about the Rangers. They're in on everybody. They're always, it's switched in recent years. All my years covering the Islanders and even a little bit covering the Rangers, where agents would always throw the Rangers in, whether we're heading into free agency, you talk to any agent, oh yeah, the Rangers are definitely interested, even if they weren't, because that was something that jacked up interest, jacked up prices. If there was a big name that was going to be traded, oh yeah, the Rangers are interested, because again, it juices the market if the Rangers are interested, because throughout the 2010s, they'd usually be interested in a guy. And now it's sort of flipped. I think the Rangers are the ones that are trying to get in on everybody and trying to get their name out there and be mentioned with a lot of different teams. And I don't know that anybody's biting necessarily. So I'm curious to see how this paradigm shift works for them. Will they have to overpay somebody to get them to come here if they have a choice in free agency? And will they have to convince guys like Dylan Larkin that this is a good place to be? And for right now, it doesn't seem like that, but there's certainly, like we said, there's going to be more of those guys to come in the next few years.
There's one name out there, and that's one of the guys I wanted to bring up, is Anders Lee, who's 35 and is walking to free agency. And I wonder if, because I think he scored like 42 points last season. He's coming off a down year, and he's 35, so he's slowing down a little bit, and he's not the top line forward that he was in the past. I wonder if we flip that on its head, and maybe Anders Lee wants to stay in the area. And what if, he approaches Rangers and says, "Okay, I will take a pay cut. I will take, a cheap 1 year, 2 year deal." Because I want to stay in the area, as opposed to the Rangers needing to overpay for somebody. Is Anders Lee somebody that you would think about signing if it's like a 1 year, $1.5, $2 million deal to slide into that maybe third line spot as somebody that could really play instead of Connor Sheary in that second line spot if need be? He's not going to be the Anders Lee that we've seen on Long Island for his entire career. But if that's somebody that really wants to stay in the area, I could see him asking New Jersey the same thing. Maybe he asked the Rangers. Would that be something that Chris Drury should entertain, even at 35?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to put what I know of Anders Lee out of my head, which is he's been the captain on the island for 9 years. I think he's the kind of guy that would probably not pivot from being the captain of the Islanders to wanting to play for the Rangers unless there was some real difficult stuff that went on between him and the Islanders. And he did walk to July 1 before he signed this recent deal 7 years ago in Lou Lamoriello's, I think it was his first season. He made it past the start of free agency without a deal, and then by the end of that night, he was still an Islander. So I think you never say never, especially with his agent, Neil Sheehy, who's one of the old school guys, drives a hard bargain. So we'll see what happens there. I know that his first choice is to stay where he's played his whole career. Secondly, I don't know that he is a guy that fits. And again, we're talking about Alex Tuch and Anders Lee, similar physical profiles, big, prototypical power forward. Tuch is younger, a little less mileage. Anders Lee is kind of that standard guy, taking a beating in front of the net. He's kind of Chris Kreider, but a little bit more square jawed and a little bit less fleet of foot, but provides similar things in terms of leadership in the room and also being a stand-up guy who goes to the dirty areas on the ice. And honestly, like Anders Lee, a 19-goal season this past year, it's more than you'd expect from a guy hasn't played power play one with the Islanders for a long time, and obviously not so sure he would jump right in to be a power play one guy with the Rangers, which would be part of his appeal, being that net front guy. I just think that looking at the list of kind of 30-something guys that could potentially fill that spot, I think if you're looking for something cheap, I feel like a guy like Michael Bunting, who's bounced around a lot, but is a guy who's got some scoring. He's got a little bit, he likes to run his mouth. He's got a little bit of an edge to his game, and he's bounced around different teams, different spots in the lineup for a lot of different places. I played for Mike Sullivan, so that could tell you a lot too. We don't really know what they think of each other. But I think you want a little bit more speed. You want a little bit more, just kind of that, if the Rangers were desperate for leadership, if it felt like things were a little bit more rudderless with all the changes that they've made, then yeah, a guy like Anders Lee, who's kind of got that veteran presence. I almost think like a guy like Ryan Strome. You played in the league a long time. You have a sterling reputation. Guys love you.
Rangers legend Ryan Strome.
Right, guys love Anders Lee. Guys love Ryan Strome. If you're needing that kind of guy, we're having a whole different conversation about this timeline for the Rangers. Then they're in desperate need of someone. Then you're kind of putting them in the same bucket as like a Chicago, where you've got a ton of youth and kind of some mismatched other pieces, and you don't really know which direction to go. Then you need a guy like Anders Lee. I don't know that the Rangers need that. I mean, JT Miller, certainly struggled under the weight of the sea this year, and we'll see how it goes in year 2. But I think they have enough guys still, whether it's Mika Zibanejad or Adam Fox or even a Vlad Gavrikov. They've got Igor. You've got guys that have served here for a long time who I think can kind of handle that in the room stuff, even if it's been very unsettled the last couple of years. So I'm going to say probably not on Anders Lee, but I feel like you're on the right track, that there are of the guys that are available, the very few that are available in free agency, you're going to have a lot of that guy with a profile of a 35 to 50 point guy who's in his 30s, who probably is going to have to accept taking a pay cut on his next deal, even with the cap going up, or at least accept that you're going to sign for a year or 2 years. And maybe if it doesn't, if the team's not where they need to be, you're going to get traded. So you're probably not going to get in an ideal world, a ton of trade protection. And I feel like there are a lot of those guys. So I think there's an easy way for the Rangers to upgrade from Connor Sheary as a middle 6 left side guy. That that to me is an easier fix. And I'm again, like if you get one of those 2 defensemen that I mentioned and plug them in on the second pair, and you can get a middle 6 leaning towards bottom 6 guy that's been around, that it's kind of a name you're like, oh hey, I know that guy. I've seen him play a lot. Like he can score, he can do a little bit of everything. That's going to be a really good July 1 for the Rangers. There's some other stuff they need to do.
Sure.
And there's probably a lot of other stuff that Chris Drury wants to do. But I feel like you take some targeted swings and you hit on both of them. You do not want to overextend yourself this free agency. And I know it's going to be tempting. They've got a ton of cap space. And certainly with whatever trades they're going to make, they're probably not going to bring in guys that are going to clog up their cap to any serious degree. So the temptation to kind of spend that space will be there. And I hope that they don't fall for it in any serious way, because then you're going to be like, I think they did too much.
One of the ways that they could is they could weaponize it. They could weaponize their cap space by saying, hey, insert team here, you have this terrible contract on your books. Pay us a second round pick and we'll take it on. If you maybe don't do it before free agency, obviously, see how free agency goes. But if it gets to a certain point in the offseason or closer to the deadline, if you have so much space and there's only so many names to go around, and there's ways of doing this, of like how the Rangers had to pay Arizona at the time to take Patrick Nemeth out their hands. They have to pay 2 second-round picks to make that happen. There's bad contracts that get signed every year that if you have the cap space to weaponize it, you can make that happen. Maybe don't do it on June 8th, but there is a path towards saying, hey, Florida, like you want to trade for Dylan Larkin? Okay. And Dylan Larkin doesn't want to come here. All right, fine. Like we'll take, this player off your roster, and you got to pay us a draft pick or another young player in return, and we'll take on that contract for you. How does that sound? There's when you're a bad team and with a lot of cap space, there are ways of going about trying to at least extract value from teams. And when you do that, you sign these guys that are maybe taking pay cuts, or that you're buying low. You're going to the bargain bin and trying to find this this guy that you signed for $2 million that plays like he deserves $7 million in a great year. And that is where the margins are maximized. It's very difficult if you're a team like the Rangers to go out and sign Alex Tuch to a $10 million deal, and that's all of your margins gone, and he doesn't perform at a $10 million value, and you didn't really fix everything else the way that you wanted because you don't have the cap space for it. And now you're at the bottom of the Eastern Conference again. It's tough, but there are ways of going about it. Maybe not on June 8th, but there are ways.
Yeah. And I'll throw another name out there as we're wrapping up here. If we're gonna go the full, let's bring a guy in that is a familiar name. If Mini makes any of these moves that they're making this, that they want to make this summer, and they price Matt Zuccarello out, I would throw him a year or two offer. I'd talk about a guy who, and this is Mike Rupp, my co-host on the Tri-State, threw it out there. Zook is the kind of guy that still has a lot of friends on this team. I think he's kind of got that veteran pain in the ass in the room, like in a good way, presence, where he's a guy that has had some success since he's left. He certainly had a lot of success when he was here. And if you're going to find someone who's still in the league, that's somehow a bridge to that era of when the Rangers were good year in and year out and kind of pushed each other to a certain extent and kind of shake the malaise off of the last couple of years, that's a guy that I would love to see come back. And I also just, I'm sure for you as a young guy watching him play, a guy who, his stick was taller than his entire body, and he was as fearless as they come, and has had such a great run, kind of being Kirill Kaprizov's running mate there for the last few years. It would surprise me if he didn't stay there, because the success has obviously been there if he's going to continue on. But that's a guy, if we're talking a short-term deal for a 30-something guy, I would love to see.
I think he's 38.
Yeah.
He's 38, but I tell you what,
not a lot of miles on him, considering that he didn't play at that high a level for the first few of his pro years over in Europe.
I tell you what, though, I mean, even if at 38, his hands are still so good. His passing is incredible, and I mean, he might not have the foot speed that he had when he was at the Rangers. Jesus, at 10 years, 12 years ago at this point. It's been a long time.
Been a long time, yes.
But if Minnesota needed to move off of him and he's available for the right circumstances, 100%. Matt, there are guys that are 38 that play like they're 58, and there are guys that are 38 that play like they're 32. And Matt Zuccarello is definitely one of those guys that, even at his age, is still a positive addition to a team, and is somebody that isn't just a 13th forward. The best example is like Kyle Okposo when he was on the Panthers. Like at that point, you trade for Kyle Okposo. He's somebody that can play if you need him to, but he's not, a top 9, even a top 12 forward anymore at that stage of his career. Matt Zuccarello is, and it can positively impact both the on ice product, and also he's a great guy in the locker room. Desperately would benefit from somebody like that. So if he's available, I'm calling Bill Guerin right now.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if he makes it to July 1. But yeah, there. It's funny when the narrative picks up that free agency is going to be such a dud. Which, if you're looking at the very, very high end of that list, yes, it is. But I think there are ways for teams to improve, and definitely being able to be smart about what you're looking for is the way for the Rangers to go. And then, we'll see in the next couple of weeks once the finals wrap up, and we're starting to, people are starting to get to that buyout window opens in the week ahead of the draft. It feels like every year there's always some rumor. The rumors promise incredible chaos and 20 guys changing teams, and this year more so than ever, because trades are really the way that you're going to improve. And I think we will see some trades, especially around the draft. But yeah, I still think you have your vision, you hold on to it, no matter how much pressure you're under. The Rangers are in a very difficult spot. They have to get better, but you can't be locked in. We've seen it happen with them. We've seen it happen with other teams. If you see one long-term deal for a defenseman and a couple of shorter, more targeted ones for forwards, then on July 1, then you can be happy.
Well, I think if you made it to the end of this episode, Stape, do you want to leak who we potentially get next week? I think if you made it to this point, I think you deserve to know who we're having on next week.
Well, we're certainly hopeful. We'll definitely try to lock it up, and even if it goes sideways for next week, we're going to have Dominic Moore on at some point. A great linchpin, as we're talking about the good old days of Matt Zuccarello. Dominic Moore was a key cog in 2014, and he's been deep into the playoffs with a bunch of different teams in his NHL career. TV analyst now, and all around good guy. So it's gonna be fun to talk to him next week, reminisce a little bit about the heyday of the Rangers, and he certainly pays close attention to the league now. So he'll have some great insights about what's going on with them these days.
And we can ask about Zuccarello.
That's right.
If you made it to this point, thank you so much. Hey, hey, before you go, very important. You got to like the video. You got to subscribe. If you want, be notified. We're going to have, hopefully, Dominic Moore on next week. So subscribe to catch that live when it goes up onto the YouTube, Spotify, Apple Store, everywhere. It's going wherever you get your podcasts. For Arthur Staple, I'm Andrew Chelney. This has been Rangers Recon. We'll talk to you next Monday.